3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
So began the adventure that engraved Neil Armstrong's name into America's history books. His was the stoic face of a project into which America had invested $20 billion and the efforts of nearly 500,000 people.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
But it was likely from the back bedroom of this house at the corner of Buchanan and West Benton Streets in Wapakoneta, Ohio, that Neil the boy made balsa wood airplanes and may have first pondered the moon, a quarter century before Neil the man touched its surface.
He was an extraordinary individual. He was so completely enthralled and involved with anything that he did. And he thought so with such depth.
George Dudley Schuler moved to Wapakoneta about 80 years ago, then a town of only 5,000 people. He attended high school and joined a Boy Scout troop with Neil Armstrong, a friendship maintained for life. Dudley probably has the longest connection to the astronaut, but it seems everybody in Wapak, as they call it here, has an Armstrong story and a fierce pride about him being theirs.
Here in Wapakoneta, we are very excited about the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 being the hometown of Neil Armstrong. It's something that we celebrate every year, but the 50th anniversary we are celebrating in a very big way.
Expectations are that 50,000 people from around the world will pack this town on July 20th, 5 times its population. NASA Television will base one of its 4 live commemorative broadcasts here. At least 5 past and current astronauts, several with Ohio connections, will be in town. There will be reunions of all sorts that date back to '69, and that summer Sunday when so many of us were gathered around fuzzy black and white TV sets. But this event isn't something the town threw together just to capitalize on the anniversary. In many ways, Wapakoneta is a time capsule, remembering a different America. A main street of small shops, antique stores and eateries, century homes and century businesses, historic civic structures. There's even a 115-year-old movie theater showing just one feature per day. The Hollywood biopic First Man, about Neil Armstrong, had its red carpet opening there last year. Because of the space connection, streets there bear names like Apollo, Saturn, and Lunar. It's a spot where the present coexists with a more serene past.
We have a lot of the original fabric, and that again ties into this whole Armstrong story, that it's not an abstract connection we have to Neil Armstrong. We can show you where he was born. We can show you his boyhood home, where he went to school, where he worked after school to earn money for his flight lessons.
Flight lessons that took place in this airplane. Yes, they've preserved the 2-seater Anka Champ as well, the first of more than 200 types of aircraft Armstrong eventually piloted. Another plane, a NASA experimental jet of which only 4 were produced, sits outside. They are just 2 of the showpieces at the Neil Armstrong Air and Space Museum, commissioned by an edict from then Ohio Governor Jim Rhodes, while Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were still on the lunar surface during the Apollo 11 mission.
It was built in honor of Neil Armstrong and all Ohioans who've attempted to defy gravity. So the point was it was just Neil not going to the moon, but it was all Ohioans and actually all Americans who helped put the first man on the moon. This is a museum showplace for the world to come here and see the hometown and the accomplishments of Neil Armstrong.
The museum is Wapakoneta's centerpiece, though it sits on the outskirts of this small town where travelers on I-75 can catch a glimpse. Funding the museum was a challenge, the governor telling people here to raise $500,000, which the state would match. Locals eagerly did so, and the museum opened just 3 years later, to the day of the moon landing, featuring artifacts ranging from high school yearbooks with Armstrong prominent in them, to newspapers from around the world commemorating the historic landing, to astronaut suits he wore in space and practiced in on Earth, to the actual Gemini 8 spacecraft Armstrong rescued when a malfunction in orbit nearly killed him and pilot David Scott.
Even if they may not know it's there, when it kind of hits them and they realize, people, this really went into space. Yeah, this really went into space. This was, especially with First Man, you could say you saw First Man.
We have serious problems.
That's the scene.
Perhaps topped only by a rock Armstrong brought home from the moon.
Neil Armstrong, he was the astronaut I was fascinated with. I don't know, just about his family and his wife and kids, and just everything about Neil was my thing.
Lakita Brewster and 12-year-old son Dallas are those typical "didn't know this was here" visitors who spotted the museum while passing by. Turns out they're huge spaceflight fans from Tennessee, changed their plans and spent the night in town to see all they could, and they loved learning more about Armstrong. Even visited that home where he was raised, Eagles Landing.
Some friends of mine were visiting, and we were talking, and one of them said, "You know, we ought to come up with a name for this house." And of course the name Eagle's Nest came up, and I said, absolutely not. It's not going to be called Eagle's Nest.
Karen Tullis lives in the Armstrong house now. Amazingly, she bought it 30 years ago without knowing it had been home to Auglaize County's most famous resident.
Then we came up with Eagle's Landing, and that's how the house got its name.
A former school teacher here and around Western Ohio, she loved having history at her fingertips and talks to visitors outside the house nearly every day, reinforcing the idea of Armstrong as salt of the earth.
I didn't do it for glory, and if you know anything about Neil, some people call him a recluse. Some people get upset because he didn't come back home as often as they thought he should, but he didn't do it for the glory. He did it because this is what he was called to do.
Like most here, she looks forward to recreating this, the Bob Hope hosted Parade of the Century in Wapak when Armstrong came home and cemented the town's place on the map. The '69 parade was Wapak's gold standard, the parade by which all other parades are measured as it traveled south down Auglaize Street here. The committee putting together the 50th says the goal is to make this parade every bit as big and every bit as memorable.
We have committees that have been working for over 2 years on this festival and many activities leading up to the anniversary date that we've been offering to the community, and then we'll ramp up to the 10-day celebration, which will bring in people from outside of the community to celebrate with us.
That was a goal of our 2019 celebration committee, to bring as many people around the table as we could and reflect as many themes for people to plug into. I'm not a space geek, so what am I going to be interested in? Maybe the music of the 60s or the movies of the 60s. Other people might be interested in the fashions of the 60s.
We also like to share the stories from his career and other Ohio astronauts and what the future might bring, because we're at the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, and that 50th anniversary is that pivot point. It's the last big significant anniversary of an event where most of the people who experienced it or participated in it are going to be around. That's just how it is.
As the day nears and the excitement builds, the memories flood in.
50 years, a man on the moon. 50 years ago, you'd never seen anything or thought of that. We would put a man on the moon for a while, and we did. And it happened to be our man from Wapakoneta, Ohio, Neil Armstrong. You knew him? I knew him, yes.
Excitement for a man who lived an exciting life, yet shunned the accompanying spotlight. And for that, Neil Armstrong is honored as well.
One of his concerns was the fact that some people thought that this museum belonged to him, and it didn't. And that goes back to the whole idea of the moon landing. And when he talked about going to the moon, it was just not him up there. There was an awful lot of other people who were involved to put him on the moon.
The moon comes up in this direction and goes over the house, and I can lay in bed and watch the moon come up, and like all people from Wapakoneta, we wink at the moon.